We're going to get started in about 1 minute. I can read out some of the messages. Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey. Harvard Business Review Guide to Critical Thinking from Leon Seo. Very good answer. Contains a selection of Harvard Business Review articles that will enable you to ask better questions, solve problems in a better manner, etc. Good stuff. All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to get started. Welcome to the Eat Big Fish webinar on A Beautiful Constraint. If you haven't picked up a copy, here it is. Don't worry, we're going to take you through some of the key principles from the book and explain what you might be able to learn from those in these times that we're entering into. My name is Jono. Let me just see if this is working. Here we go. My name is Jono. It rhymes with Bono, as Will.i.am once told me in a very weird branded event I went to in a shopping estate that we were opening as an event for a company that I was working for. He said, "Oh, Jono, like it rhymes with Bono and John Lennon." And from there on out, I decided that was how I would introduce myself. So that's me. More importantly, why are you here? I imagine that you're probably here. You probably joined this call because the world is in a bit of a mess right now. Some people would call it a poly crisis. Other people would call it VUCA, apparently. VUCA is an interesting phrase that stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Whatever it is that you call it, we are all definitely feeling constraints in the world right now, aren't we? Even especially in the marketing industry. A selection of headlines here, just basically from the last couple of weeks, and actually Marketing Week's career and salary survey that they conducted in 2025 said that 55% of marketers have seen a change in their job remit without an increase in remuneration. We are all having to do more with less, aren't we? So I don't know how that makes you feel. It might make you feel like our dear friend Ted Lasso here. If it does, then you're a great person. You can hang up. You do not need to join this webinar. However, some of you may be feeling a little bit more like Toby Ziegler. There's literally no one in the world that I don't hate right now. If that's how you feel, you're not alone. But my ambition is to ask you a question today that perhaps you can be honest with yourself at the beginning, and hopefully towards the end of this webinar, you'll answer that question a little bit differently. The question would be, how is your relationship with constraints? How is your relationship with constraints? Are you guys talking and getting on? Or is constraints, you know, if you were to personify constraints, is it a person that maybe you're trying to run away from and hide from? Have a little think on that question while we're going through this webinar and tell me if that's changed at the end. So we're going to share 4 challenger behaviors with you today. And as part of that, we're going to also share 6 practical tools that I hope will be helpful to you all, as well as 3 surprises, more on that later. And there's going to be some time for questions at the end. We're going to try and I'll talk at you until about 1:45 the hour. I don't know where in the world you're dialing in from, but approximately 40 minutes of talking, and then hopefully 15 minutes at least of time to have a conversation. Just to let you know, I'm seeing the chat blowing up. I can't view the chat right now while I'm in present mode. You're seeing my whole screen. I have Jamie with me here in the room. Jamie's going to help me moderate the chat. So do keep those messages coming through and we'll make sure that we address them. So a quick overview of who we are, if you don't know. We are Eat Big Fish. We are the world's leading consultancy in challenger brands and challenger thinking. For us, challenger is all about a mindset. So for some people hear challenger and they think, you know, small brands, startup brands, maybe punchy, aggressive brands, perhaps second in the market brands. For us, we don't see it quite that way. We see challenger as being a state of mind. A state of mind that sort of says, you know, if there's a big player in the market, like our friend here on the right, that's saying, do you want to have a fight? Well, then perhaps the odds don't look so good for our little friend on the left here, do they? But what challengers do and what this challenger mindset says is, actually, I'm going to change the criteria of choice. I'm going to ask, do you want to have a race? And when you change the criteria of choice in the category, suddenly the odds look a lot better, don't they, for our friend here on the left. In addition, Challenger is not something that happens or doesn't happen. It's a bit of a muscle. It's a muscle that has to be continually exercised and developed. And if you are on this call today working at a Challenger brand, welcome. It's great to have you here. If you're on this call today working at a massive company, also welcome to you. Challengers do not have to be small businesses. In fact, all of these brands here that you can see are all challengers. They all have that challenger mindset. They continue to lead and grow because of their challenger mindset. And some pretty large businesses there, as you can see. In fact, Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, is quoted as saying, "We are the industry Goliath because we think like the industry David. We're the industry Goliath because we think like the industry David." And there is an attitude that some big companies have of thinking small, and it helps them sort of ally their scale with a challenger mindset. In fact, those are often the most successful challengers. Almost done talking about us. We'll get to the good bit soon, but just to give you some context, we have around 25 years of experience in the challenger mindset. Our founder, Adam, has written a selection of books that you can see here on the screen, starting in 1999 with a book that many of you may have read, Eating the Big Fish. Which is all about challenger brand strategy. And then in addition, a book on culture and how you can operate as a challenger within a large organization that is not like a challenger. A Beautiful Constraint, which of course we're going through today, as well as Overthrow, a sort of a book that is updated periodically every few years to talk about different archetypes and different narratives that challenger brands tell. So we're here to talk about this one, aren't we? A Beautiful Constraint. Now, when it comes to constraints and what a constraint is, I imagine that some of you may have different starting points. But if I could venture to guess, I would guess that they might be something like this. You know, you might think that a constraint is by definition a negative thing. Oftentimes we think that. Or you might think that a constraint is a force that holds us down, you know, something that knocks us back, something that makes us fail. Well, this webinar's aim, and the reason that Eat Big Fish has put this webinar on, is to show you how and why the opposite of that is true. And in fact, the definition that I would like to start with and to use for the rest of this webinar is as follows. A constraint, as we see it, is a limitation that is imposed either by outside circumstances or by ourselves, and that's really important. It could be imposed by outside circumstances, or we can impose it upon ourselves willingly, that materially affects our ability to do something. And then crucially for challengers, constraints can be beautiful. So that's the definition that we're working with today. A constraint is a limitation imposed either by outside circumstances or by ourselves that materially affects our ability to do something. In terms of the people that wrote the book, some of you may be slightly sad and disappointed to see my face. No offense taken. It was written by Adam and Mark. Some of you may know them. Here are their lovely faces. The bad news is you're stuck with me. But in order to make their presence felt and to practice what I preach about constraints, I asked them a question last week. I asked them a question. I said, could you please help me out here? I've got lots and lots of people dialing in from around the world to join a webinar all about constraints. And I'd like to practice what I preach. So could you please give me a webinar-based constraint to make it better? That's what I asked. And Adam came back and said, I'd like you to surprise everybody 3 times. So that's what I'm going to try and do. And Mark here on the right has asked that I would try to create more energy on this webinar than we would have if we met in person. We loved at Eat Big Fish to do in-person workshops. There's always plenty of energy in the room for any of you on this call that have been part of one of them. So my twofold constraint from Adam and Mark is to surprise you 3 times and to try and create more energy than we would have in person. So what we're going to try and do in the next approximately 30 minutes is we're going to try and go through these 3 or kind of 4 different challenger behaviors. And to make it a little bit more interesting and to try and spice things up and to surprise you, we've got a little gimmick here. So you're going to have to indulge me on it. We've got a little thing that we're calling the Wheel of Constraints. As you can see on the Wheel of Constraints, these are pretty brutal. They're going to be imposed upon me. At different stages in this webinar, I'm going to spin the Wheel of Constraints. We're going to see what it lands on. And whatever it says I have to do, I will do that while I explain to you the theory of a beautiful constraint. So I have here with me in the office some hot sauce and a shot glass. I've got a a big fish mask. We'll have to wait and see what the wheel of constraints lands on and what I end up having to do. And when we get to the Q&A session, if you would like to be sadists, you're more than welcome to spin the wheel of constraints and force me to do that whilst I'm answering your question, because I'd like to practice what I preach. So let's get into it. First of all, of the three or kind of four different challenger behaviors that we're going to discuss. The first one is to embrace constraints, to embrace constraints. Really, this is the foundation of a beautiful constraint, is that often we are forced in work and in life to do more with less. And when you're forced to do more with less, how do you respond? That's the fundamental question. Many of us respond by working harder, late into the night, just saying, I'm going to make up for it with my own time. Some of us respond by lowering our ambitions. That's also a pretty common response to having to do more with less. Or my poor son, Freddie, is going to have to forgive me for this because this is a real photo of him when he was younger. We maybe just have a big old cry and we say, I'm going to have to do more with less. That sucks. I feel like Freddie. I'm absolutely miserable about that. When we wrote the book about constraints, Adam and Mark had a hypothesis. So they had a hypothesis that said there's three types of people. Some people are victims to constraints, some people are neutralizers, and some people are what they call transformers. This was their theory. What do those three things mean? Well, a victim, somebody who's a victim, somebody who responds to a constraint like a victim, might be like our friend here on his way to see somebody. He reaches some traffic jam of some kind. There's traffic, it's going to slow him down. And so this person lowers his ambition. And he says, I wanted to be there at 3 o'clock. Turns out I'm going to be there at 3:15. That sucks. The constraint is what it is. I'm going to have to lower my ambition. That's the victim. And again, this was the theory that we had going into this. Some people are just like victims with constraints. Some people, we said, are like neutralizers who meet the ambition. So they still find a way over that constraint and they get back to their original ambition. This is a very, very funny picture here of a sort of government office that sorry, I'm seeing some messages coming through in the chat. I'm afraid I can't read them, but do keep them coming. This is a very funny picture of a government office where there was a long queue, and the folks in the queue decided that instead of standing in the queue, they would just put their shoes and their flip-flops in line. Their shoes and flip-flops would queue for them, and that would mean that everybody would be able to sit down. They would still be able to have a relax, and they would meet their place in the queue when the time was done. So that's meeting the ambition. And then the theory was that there's this third type of person, the transformer, these amazing sort of unicorns who, when they get faced with a constraint, find a way to raise their ambition. This was an example of an ambition that was imposed upon somebody. So this was Turkish Airlines, who, it's a slightly long story that I don't have time to get into, but were trying to find a way to get people to connect through Istanbul airport when going to the Middle East. Their planes had to sort of have layovers there, and the layovers were quite long. They were almost 6 hours in order to clean the planes and turn them around. And so they came up with the idea of encouraging people to fly not direct, but through Istanbul with Turkish Airlines, sorry, by saying, we're going to give you a free layover tour. If you fly through Istanbul, we're going to give you a free sort of 6-hour tour of Istanbul, and we'll pay the bill. And it led to a huge uptick in people choosing to fly not direct, but with Turkish Airlines. Brilliant, brilliant. But, a unicorn type of person, or so we thought. Alternatively, some of these constraints and sort of transformers are the sorts of people that have constraints imposed upon themselves. They choose to do it. If anybody has watched Hot Ones, the brilliant talk show on YouTube, Sean Evans and the team at First We Feast artificially chose to impose upon themselves the constraint of, we're not just going to do a chat show, we're going to do a chat show whilst eating spicy chicken wings. That's going to be a constraint that will make our show more fun. So that was our theory. 3 kinds of people that respond differently. However, when interviewing various different people, including this chap, Michael Beirut from Pentagram, Michael actually said, no, Adam, Mark, you're almost there, but you're missing it. Because actually, I am all of those people. I am a victim and a neutralizer and a transformer. That's the process I go on when I have a tough brief. I start by having a big cry. Then I say, do you know what? I'm going to get over it. And then I say, actually, this constraint is a gift to me. So in reality, it's really three stages in the same person. And what we would put to you is that the incumbent mindset is on the left-hand side here. And the challenger mindset that we at Eat Big Fish celebrate so much and try to help our clients find is more towards moving towards that right-hand side. So the first question I would have for you all is, if I'm honest, and you don't have to put answers to the chat in this can be internal reflections if you'd like, or do feel free to write them down if you would find that helpful. If I'm honest, has anything going on at work right now made me lower my ambitions? And in addition, how do I embrace constraints and not remain victimized by them? That would be the first question that I would ask you. How do I embrace constraints and not remain victimized by them? Okay. How's everybody doing so far? Doing okay? I think it's time to spin the wheel of constraints for the first time. Okay, so hopefully this is going to work. I'm going to slide this over. Can everybody see the screen? Can everybody see my cursor moving? Jamie, is the cursor going okay? All right. I'm hoping that the wheel of constraints is going to be merciful to me. We're going to see what we get. We're spinning. I promise for the next section, I'm going to do whatever it says. Oh, no notes. Okay. Well, I'm turning my notes. I have my notes here on the iPad. I'm turning my presenter notes off for this next section. No notes will be consulted. I will stick with the constraint that I've given myself. Here we go. Let's see what comes up next. Okay, Jamie is just cringing over in the corner. I think she thought this wasn't real, but this is happening. Okay, we're going to break with expectations next. This is the next step in the process of seeing constraints as more beautiful. We're going to break with expectations. We're going to really see how well I rehearse now, aren't we? So this is a fantastic quote from a lady that we love here at Eat Big Fish called Rear Admiral Grace Hopper. And Grace Hopper was a fabulous woman who started her career when the word computer meant women. Literally, women would be computers. When the military was talking about computers, they meant a room full of people, almost exclusively females, who would be doing various different calculations by hand, and that would be how you would compute things. And towards the end of her career, she helped launch the machine that was the precursor to the computer as we know it today. Had she done things the way that they were done, perhaps we wouldn't have computers that I'm presenting to you on today. And so she's a living example of how dangerous this phrase is. We've always done it this way. And if we're honest, we've probably we've probably said that to other people, haven't we? We've probably said that to colleagues or co-workers or even to ourselves. Why am I doing this? It's just the way that it's done. So how did this happen? Well, usually it follows the same sort of process, which is that something happens and, 5 people try and solve a problem one way and they fail, and the 6th person tries something and it succeeds, and they think, great, I've done it. Good job, me. I'm going to chalk this up as good practice. And everybody else looks around and says, what did they do? I'm going to copy that. And that becomes good practice. And that's great. And it's understandable, but it very quickly becomes proven practice. And once proven practice takes root, it becomes corporately preferred practice. And then finally, locked in behavior is what you're left with. This is what we would call path dependence at Eat Big Fish, path dependence, where you end up in a rut of thinking and you don't even know how you ended up there. It kind of manifests itself in lots of different ways. Some of you may have done one of these little AI generated images of the action figures. I know that I tried to do it. My legs poked out the bottom. I couldn't really get it to work. It always starts really fun and cool, and then very quickly becomes quite old hat. And this path dependence, it can change very, very rapidly. So to take a little thought experiment about the need to break with expectations and the risks of path dependence, we're going to try it in the water category. So let's design a water brand the incumbent way. What sort of things might you care about when it comes to the water category? Well, I actually have a little bit more skin in the game, and I've learned some lessons the hard way and got my hands burnt on this one, because I actually did design a water brand. And I'm ashamed to admit I did design a water brand in an incumbent way. This is a picture of me with more hair several years ago in California. I helped somebody set up a business in California called Right Water. The idea was we're going to set up a canned water brand instead of a plastic water bottle brand that's going to be better for the environment. We had Greenpeace's support and we thought it's going to be great. So, these are the sorts of things that I cared about. I set up this factory and got some nice plain silver cans to look nice and simple and minimal. I looked at the water category and I said, what's important in the water category? Well, where you get your water from, that's important, the sourcing, the purity of your water, the vitality of the water and what it provides for you, the healthfulness and positivity of the brand. These are two big brands, Deer Park in the States, Buxton here in the UK. And I looked at these as almost a reference point for the brand that I was creating. And so here is the brand that I helped create on the right-hand side. And I was influenced by those criteria of choice. This is kind of an example of what we would call the Mephisto waltz. It's a pretty grandiose term for a very simple concept, which is when two black holes in space start to get obsessed with each other and they enter each other's gravitational field and they spin around each other. And all that black hole A cares about is black hole B, and all that black hole B cares about is black hole A. And they begin to circle and circle and circle until eventually they implode and gravity ceases to exist in the immediate vicinity. That's kind of what happens when our primary influence in our category is our biggest competitor. When we look to our biggest competitor and try to emulate them, they often end up emulating us, and we end up losing everything that was interesting in the first place. Enter everybody's favorite challenger brand in the water category, Liquid Death. Now, Liquid Death was being set up around the same time that I was setting up Right Water, and they broke all of the rules. They were not positive. They did not really care about their water sourcing, and they certainly were not going for vitality credentials, as you can see. And the reason for that was very strategic. Andy Pearson, who's VP of Creative there, said, our competition is not other brands in the category. Our competition is other things that you see in your social feed. That's our competition. Really, really powerful strategic quote there from Andy. So what we've actually also found is that incumbent thinking costs more money. It's not just something that's a bad idea, it's also something that's very bad for business. Adam and John, that you can see here on the right-hand side, have shared research about this at Cannes, when they have explained that there is a cost of making consumers feel nothing. I'm not going to be able to go into all of the research right now. There's going to be new research coming out at Cannes in a few weeks' time. And if you're at Cannes, I would encourage you to check out Adam and Karen Nelson Field's talk. There's going to be some new data coming out. But it's built upon System 1's database of emotion. And it says that if you make people feel nothing, they will do nothing. And most advertising and most brands make people feel nothing. And when you feel nothing, you don't move. So there's data about the cost of dull and how dull brands have to spend at least twice as much money as their interesting counterparts to have the same uplift in sales. This is a real thing that's really affecting brands' bottom lines. So the question that I would ask is, where do we need to most resist the status quo? Where do we need to most resist incumbent thinking? And what do we do to avoid neutral? What does interesting look like in our category? If you need some help and some stimulation in this area, we have a podcast called Let's Make This More Interesting, which is exploring exactly this topic outside of the world of marketing, talking to people, from school teachers to the head writer on Sesame Street and everyone in between, trying to find how you can be interesting. So that's the next question that I would ask you. Okay, I'm taking my notes back with great delight. I'm going to have my notes for the next section, and we're going to spin this dastardly constraint wheel again, and we'll see what we get. Okay, I'm slightly terrified. That was quite hard doing that without notes. Okay, we're going to have to spin it again. We're not doing no notes twice. That's just too much. Phrase bingo card. Okay, I have here a bingo card of some very cringy phrases that my office has put me up to. Business jargon, including words like circle back, run it up the flagpole, and touch base. So my constraint for this section is going to be I have to use all 6 of these phrases. Let's take this offline: circle back, touch base, synergy, think outside the box, and run it up the flagpole. Let's see how I can do. So the third challenger behavior here when it comes to making constraints more beautiful is about learning to say we can if. Now, there's an elephant in the room, which is worth mentioning. Learning how to say we can if, it does feel like the sort of thing a consultant would say. But actually, we didn't come up with it. This was a creation of a very much not a consultant, a man called Colin Kelly, who is the head of R&D at a bakery brand in the UK called Warburton's. And when we touched base, with him, he said, there we go, it's 1 out of 6. When we touched base with him, he said that actually he was working in a factory in Russia. And everybody was layering up negativity and saying, we can't do that because of this. We can't do that because of this. And eventually he said, guys, enough. I want every sentence to start with the words, we can if. And when he circled back to them, that's 2 out of 6, he found that that led to a much more positive and open-minded environment. Because can't because is sort of a story about what we're bad at. Can't because says that we're too small to do this. We're too poor to do this. It's ego damaging stuff. Whereas can if is a much better way to start a conversation. Can if says we are creative people who can solve problems. If we run it up the flagpole, we will make it happen. We can think outside the box. Yes, I've got 4 out of 6. I'm doing great. So we have some very practical tools here to explore can if. I promise you 6 practical tools. We're going to go through each of these with a brand example for each. This is sort of the meat of this talk, and then we have one final lesson to learn. So first of all, let's look at we can if we remove or substitute something. These are not an exhaustive list of rules, but these are sort of observations that we made about the ways in which resourceful businesses manage to break through constraints and turn them into opportunities. So let's look at we remove or substitute. A great example of this would be Cereal in the UK and Magic Spoon in the States. These are 2 cereal brands who removed or substituted a pretty fundamental thing, which was both sugar and carbohydrates. Pretty fundamental to breakfast cereal. The reason that they decided to do that was because what they wanted to do was sell direct to consumer. And in order to sell direct to consumer, they wanted to sell to a younger millennial audience at a higher price point in order to justify the margins needed for selling a box of cereal direct to consumer. You can't exactly sell a $1.99 box of cornflakes to someone's door and make much money. But if you can sell something for $6, then maybe there's some margin in it for you. And so they said, we can do that if we remove sugar and carbohydrates and replace it with protein and natural sweeteners and sort of anchor the price against other high protein breakfasts. Brilliant move by Magic Spoon and by Cereal. So what can you remove from your plans that isn't adding value? What's something fundamental that everybody assumes must be present that perhaps you could remove? What's something that you could substitute that's more desirable or better value instead? So that was we remove or substitute. We can if we remove or substitute. What about we can if we access other people to do something? This is an excellent example of synergy. I'm 5 out of 6 on my bingo card, guys. I'm really pleased with myself. There's one left, which is let's take this offline. That's going to be quite hard to do on an online webinar. So we can if we access other people too. There's a few examples here, brilliant examples. This is Sea Hero Quest, which was developed by Deutsche Telekom and Alzheimer's Research UK, a friend of eatbigfish. And they were trying to understand how they could gather enough data about the brain and how the brain works, how the healthy brain works versus the brain with dementia. And we're trying to gather a huge amount of data, so much that if they had gathered it using traditional market research and traditional sort of medical research, it would have taken 176 centuries to collect based on how long each clinical trial takes. And so what they did is they, instead of doing it through traditional clinical trials, they created a game called Sea Hero Quest, which was designed, the game was an infinite map that you could explore. And the map was designed to be somewhat like the human brain. And the paths that people chose to take helped them understand how the healthy brain works. And they were able to cross-reference that against the brain with dementia. They gathered data from 4.3 million players who played over 117 years worth of total gameplay. And it gave them fabulous results, able to sort of a global benchmark for how the human brain navigates, how it varies amongst men and women, how it varies amongst young and old. A brilliant way of accessing other people in order to do something. Another example here is from Rocket in the States with their Super Bowl ad. I have a video here. I'm not sure if it's going to play, so I might skip over it just in case. Sometimes videos can be a little patchy. If I could take this offline and you were here in the office with me, then it would work just great. But I'm not going to try and do that. Jamie is literally shaking her head. So we're not going to play the video. But Rocket, a Super Bowl ad costs an enormous amount of money. They cost approximately $8 million for a 30-second spot. Rocket could only afford a 15-second spot, but they wanted to have the impact of a 60-second spot. So they were sort of thinking, well, we can't do it. If we've only got 15 seconds, that's what we're stuck with. Well, actually, they said we can if we access other people. And what they did is they captured the attention of a live audience inside the stadium, 80,000 fans. And they did the very first live sing-along of a Super Bowl ad. Their ad was a very heartwarming ad, all about a moment of unity to the tune of Take Me Home, Country Roads by John Denver. Big tune, if you don't know it. And at the end of the ad, they cut to the stadium, and everybody in the stadium was singing along, and they aired that as part of the ad as a follow-up. Brilliant idea to extend the impact to 60 seconds. Like I say, I'm not going to play this video just in case it doesn't. So, are there people beyond your immediate team who can help? What can you offer them in exchange to encourage them to contribute? And if you'd like to talk to me after this, feel free to drop me an email or a message here on the chat about scarcity and abundance. There's some brilliant thinking in A Beautiful Constraint about scarcity and abundance. I don't have time to get into it today. All about how you can access resources beyond your immediate control, finding parties that have adjacent abundance. So do feel free to talk with me about that. Next, we can if we resource or fund it in an interesting way. Now, of course, there's crowdfunding. That sort of goes without saying. These are all billion-dollar businesses that made their start with crowdfunding. Oculus, PopSockets, Allbirds, Peloton, they all started as crowdfunding projects and turned into billion-dollar businesses. That's sort of the obvious answer. But I think it's important to look beyond just cash and raising money through crowdfunding. Some very sort of lateral examples here. IKEA in Sweden, unless you live in Sweden, you may not have seen this, but just inspired creativity by the ad agency who came up with this. IKEA Sweden did not have a billboard budget, but they wanted to promote their new blinds that were extremely good value. And so instead of paying for billboards around Stockholm, they gave out some free blinds to people living in apartments and houses. I can see Adam raising his hand. It's possible. Adam, did you work on this project yourself? I can't see the chat, but I saw that you raised your hand. Do let us know in the chat if you have a connection to this. Brilliant stuff. They gave out free blinds to people in apartments and homes around Stockholm. And the only catch was that there were ads printed on the rear side of them. So if you're living inside the house, you get a free set of blinds and you don't even see anything. It's a win for you. And if you're walking through the street, you see these ads in unexpected places. It saved them a ton of money on purchasing billboard space. And honestly, at the cost price of a set of blinds, it was not all that much money for IKEA in the first place. You know, additional examples, brilliant example of Taylor Swift going up against Scooter Braun when he sort of sold her masters to a bank, and she lost control of her creative back catalogue. And we all know the story, don't we, of how she managed to sort of turn that into an opportunity. She didn't A, act like a victim, roll over and die, or B, act like a sort of neutralizer and find some way of getting money and purchasing it back for herself. Instead, she used it as an opportunity to make her wildly more successful than she could have been by re-recording all of her old songs, which gave her not only a bit more control over her own narrative, but it also meant that she was releasing music every single month for a year. And she blasted through the charts and made a ton of awareness and money for herself at the same time. So are there any creative ways that we could raise money? Could we buy what we need with a resource other than money? Some of these questions, they're thorny ones, aren't they? They're not quick to answer, but they're really worth writing down and mulling on with your teams. Is there a way that we can buy or barter for what we need with a resource other than money? It's a great question to ask. Okay, we resource or fund it by what's next? Well, we can if we introduce a new something. This is one of my favorite personal examples from Siemens Healthcare. They were trying to figure out a way to make MRI scanners, which they manufacture, a little bit less scary for kids. If anyone's ever had an MRI, you will know that they're quite intimidating things, a lot of clunking and banging next to your head. And kids would often move their heads in fear, and then the images would be blurred and they wouldn't get what they need. And so they created an audiobook that was designed specifically to run in parallel with the MRI scan, and it incorporated scary sounds. So as the child is laying there having their MRI scan, the story would warn you that there's a big bang coming up, and then bang, the MRI machine would shake next to the kid's head, and it would feel less scary because it was part of the story. A brilliant example of introducing a new product or service into the offer, or a new process or a new way of working. Penultimately, we can if we mix together. So mixing is very much a core challenge of behavior. We all know about things like the cronut, don't we? I think there's a new one now, the crookie, I think it's called, a croissant and a cookie mixed together. Yeah. I think that's the new thing. There's always a new thing to queue around the block for with baked goods, isn't there? IKEA would be a great example of this. Blending together, mixing together the idea of a coffee table and a door. They wanted to find a way to sell side tables for less than €5, and they couldn't do it until they realized that actually cheap doors are made of thin bits of veneer and a lattice of cardboard between them. And so they said, actually, if we cut up doors and put legs on them, we can make this happen. That's the inside of every lac table that every student across the land has probably had in their living room at some point. So mixing together, are there surprising components that we could add together to reach our goal? Have we noticed an ingredient that our competitors are not using? And then finally, on the can-if map, this is the final one to share, which is we can if we think of it as something different. Zappos is a great example here. Tony Hsieh, the founder of Zappos, is quoted as saying that we should think of ourselves as a customer service company that happens to sell shoes. We should think of ourselves as a customer service company that happens to sell shoes. This is the sort of trite phrase that's very easy to say, but Zappos really meant it. They had incentives such as paying bonuses to the customer service operative who had the longest phone call. Most customer service companies incentivize the shortest ones, they incentivize the longest ones. And this chap here on the phone managed to stay on the phone for 11 hours with one customer who was very lonely and wanted someone to talk to while she waited for her shoes to arrive. Brilliant way of thinking about yourself as a different category. This is an example that Susie, my very brilliant co-worker, spotted in Mexico City from Strongbow. So Strongbow is saying, what if we think about our cider not as an alcoholic drink, but as a fresh quality fruit drink? And so they created this brilliant set of branded weigh scales in the produce section with a bunch of Strongbow underneath it. Crucially, the constraint that they were given was they're not allowed to just sell cider wherever they want in the store. So they couldn't have moved this without the weigh scales into the produce section, but by making it part of weigh scales, they were able to lead to a 1% incremental sales boost with this activation alone. Doesn't sound like much, but it's quite amazing given what a tiny point of sale display it is, and it's in an enormous supermarket, so that would probably help. And finally, as an example of this, we can if we think of it as we think of surgery as like an F1 pit stop. I think this is, of all of the examples, one of the most brilliant examples that I was able to find. So this was a chap called Kareem El Bogdadli, who's the consultant anaesthetist who designed the program with his colleague Imran Ahmad. They were faced with a huge backlog of surgeries at their hospital in London. And he said, I want my surgeons spending 90% of their time in theatre. I don't want them scrubbing up, doing surgery, cleaning, going to the next consult, scrubbing up again. They're wasting a ton of time. And so what they did was they said, we're going to be inspired by F1 pit stops. We're going to have one person doing the right rear wheel, one person doing the front left wheel. It's the same thing. Operating theatre is effectively like that, he said. And this is an approach that now the UK's Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is planning on rolling out more broadly. Just brilliant way of looking at inspiration from outside of your category. So is there a metaphor or an analogy that we could apply to our brand? Can we draw inspiration from other categories or other businesses? And those are the 6 practical tips that challengers use to get through hard times. That is the can-if map. There's so much more that I could talk about. I'm getting close to the end of my 45 minutes to speak with you before some Q&A. When this book was written, it was sort of described as the recipe to lemonade. When everybody says that when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, and sometimes you need a recipe, you need to figure out how to make lemonade. That's what this book is intended to do. I don't have time to cover the whole lemonade recipe in 45 minutes. There's so much more that we could have covered. I've not even gotten into propelling questions, a crucial tool that challengers use. I haven't even had time to explain what that is. I haven't had time to talk about creating abundance. We're going to need more time to talk about those topics. But just like Columbo, there is one more thing that I would love to talk about, and then we will throw it open to some Q&A. And this is about activating emotion. Activating emotion. Now, by this, I don't mean activating emotion with your target customers. This isn't about being emotional in your external message. This is about an internal emotion. This is about a drive that's going to keep you and your team going. So, if you're the sort of person that looks at your job as just a job, I hate to break it to you, that's probably not going to cut it to turn constraints into something beautiful. People who see their job as just a job tend to meet constraints and lower their ambitions, or at best meet them. The people that tend to surpass their ambitions and raise their ambitions are the people that say it's more than a job. This matters to me. And I think this is probably why founders and startups have got an advantage over executives at big companies. If you're an executive on this call, if you work at a big company and you're not a founder, you're not bootstrapping, you probably have got some ground to make up, candidly. You've probably got some catching up to do, because if your house is not on the line, if your reputation is not on the line, it's easy to treat something like just a job. So it starts to tap into this idea of emotions. What is it that these brilliant founders of these challenger brands do so well? And I think the key here is about an emotional narrative that drives them. And it doesn't just drive them when it's easy, it drives them when life gets really hard. So what kind of emotional narrative do you think you would need? The assumption is probably a positive one, right? You would assume that you would need a really positive emotion to feel really good thoughts, optimism and happiness. And that's definitely useful. Clinical psychologists have found that when you are optimistic and happy, you feel sort of psychologically safe. And when you're psychologically safe, you have what's called cognitive flexibility to explore new possibilities, and to be open-minded. And that's a good thing. However, I don't want you to discount negative emotional narratives. That's a weird thing to say in this day and age, but the late, great Dan Wieden, the man behind the agency Wieden and Kennedy and the creator of the Nike brand, said this brilliant quote. I'm just going to read it to you for a moment. He said, "Chaos does this amazing thing that order can't. It engages you. It gets right in your face with a freakish breath, and it issues you a challenge. It asks stuff of you order never will. And it shows you stuff, all the weird stuff that order tries to hide. Chaos is the only thing that honestly wants you to grow." I'm going to read that again. Chaos is the only thing that honestly wants you to grow. The only friend who really helps you be creative demands that you be creative. And I think there's a truth in there, isn't there? There's something in there that Dan Wieden has touched on. There's something about some element of positive outcomes from fear and anxiety, because as he noticed, and this was Dan Weiden's observation, fear and anxiety can help you sort of knuckle down and do more work and work through to the end. So there's something in that. Obviously not too much of it, but there's something in it. And what we would put to you is that actually it's something about the blending of the two. There's some research by some researchers, Nijstat, Drew, Reichel, and Baas, called the dual pathway to creativity model. It was published in the European Review of Social Psychology in 2010, and they found that this is a quote from them: "There is an anxiety sweet spot where we are sufficiently aroused to act, but not paralyzed by fear." And so what we would say, and I'm almost finished and coming to the Q&A section, what we would say is that there's two sort of mental states that you can be in. You can dwell on the negative emotions, and you can indulge in the positive emotions. You can dwell, creating a powerful and fully realized picture of all that could go wrong along the journey. And that's important to do. That's the dark side. That's the negative stuff. You need that. But you also need to create this vivid picture of what the future looks like when you've achieved your goal. And what challengers tend to do is they tend to focus more on the indulging, and then they shrink that back down, and then they toggle to the dwelling, and then they toggle constantly between these two different emotional states. And there's something that's done when you toggle between those two different emotional states that allows you to get things done. So the way that it's put in A Beautiful Constraint is we need to weave an emotional narrative that is true, both to the challenge and to us, full of rich, contrasting emotions, and we need to keep it close and vivid as long as we are working on it. One final example that illustrates this beautifully is JD Wetherspoon. If anybody lives in the UK, I am sure that you've been to a Spoons, as we call it. Everybody's been to a Spoons. And Wetherspoons is named after the physics teacher of the founder. Sir Tim Martin founded Wetherspoon. And he had a physics teacher that told him, you will never amount to anything. This physics teacher looked him in the eye and said, Tim, you will never amount to anything. And that gave him the positive and the negative emotional state to say, I'm going to show that guy, I'm going to do it. It's going to be brilliant when I've done it. And it made me mad when he said that to me. And he toggled between those two emotional states and created the pub chain that we all know today, a huge, massive pub chain in the UK. So to recap before some Q&A, we're going to embrace constraints. We're going to break with expectations. We're going to learn to say we can if, and we're going to activate your team's emotions. That's just about everything from me. I know this is hard. There's a final quote here from the book, just to acknowledge the fact that the person most affected by constraints will not always be the person best placed to see the possibility in it. If you're facing a constraint, you might struggle to see it. That's kind of why we're here. That's why we exist, is to help you. Here's our lovely team at Eat Big Fish. So don't be too stressed if it's hard to see the positivity in your constraint. But I would love to throw it open to some questions in the chat. And Jamie, if you would you help me moderate this and pull out any questions? Also, guys, if you would like to, I have the wheel of constraints that we can spin for answering questions one last time, because I promised you 3 surprises and there's only been 2. And we've got our hot sauce and our banana and our fish head. So you just let me know. Jamie, questions?
We've got quite a few.
Great.
Answers. Any tips for implementing the can if mindset into a company?
Any tips for implementing the can if mindset into a company? I think sharing a speech like this is a good starting point, and do get in touch with us if you would like us to come and give a speech like this. Sometimes a speech is a good way to kick things off. I think that we can there's something about small teams believing something powerfully and trying something, having sort of meaningful experiments in a small way, and then being able to prove it. And if you can have success in a small way, you can then say to your boss or to your boss's boss, here's why it happened. This is the methodology that we were using. I think find a small area where you can own and just try the can if mindset and see if it's useful. People tend to want to use things that prove to be useful, and the can if mindset is very useful.
Awesome. Next
Great.
one. It kind of combines a couple.
Okay.
So do you think that as the world becomes more and more complex, will there be a sort of constraints market? What does the future hold for constraint thinking?
Ooh, what does the future hold for constraint thinking? We're gonna answer this one as a big fish because I'm true to my word. What does the future hold for the constraint market? I think constraints. I think cons I think constraints are getting more confusing and more complicated. I think that it's getting more accepted that everybody faces constraints. I think when the book was written, big businesses felt, this is so ridiculous. What am I paid to do? Big businesses felt that it was almost taboo to admit that you had constraints. And I think now it's more acceptable because everybody's facing them in some way. So I think that we'll see them being less stigmatized, the idea of admitting that you have constraints. And I think we're going to see more stories. Founder stories are really popular. And I think that as more and more founders share the behind the scenes of how they got to their success, they tend to share, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And usually founder stories contain stories of constraints of some kind. So that's what I would say would probably be the future of constraints. Jamie, do we have any more questions? We've got 10 more minutes.
Yes, we do.
That's hot.
Let's do it's a fun one. Knowing the constraints of the category, if you were to design a water brand now, being liquid death, what would you do differently?
Oh my goodness, that is a fun one. Who asked that question so that I can? What's the name of the person that asked that question? Helen. Oh, it's a good question, Helen. Okay. I have no idea. If I knew the answer to that, I would be doing it as a side hustle in the evenings. I think that I don't know. It's a great question. I'm going to have to think about that and come back to you. Next one.
How do you decide when what you thought was a constraint was actually a brick wall? What are the warning signs?
Mm. Um, yeah, I think it's good. I think it's important to be realistic at the same time. We talk sometimes about the difficult first year when it comes to acting like a challenger within a big company. So I think that if you don't feel that there's any form of emotional positivity and negativity at the same time, if all you're feeling is negativity and you can't truthfully visualize that positive future when that constraint has been overcome, if you really have some introspection and you think, well, of course it would be lovely, but it just can't be done, I think it's important to move on. I don't think that anyone gives you an award for sort of staying still. I think progress and momentum is essential. But I think that we all have that sort of prick in our conscience when we know that there's a constraint that is almost like a brick wall, because that's a sweet spot, isn't it? You want something that is a brick wall to everyone else, but you've had a brainwave of a way that perhaps you might be able to overcome it. Um, if a constraint is like a wall made of paper and everyone can run through it, then everyone will have already run through it. So it needs to be somewhat like a brick wall. And I think you just have to trust your gut on that one. I don't think there's a strict rule. If you have a sense that there might be something to be done about it, then go for it and don't give up.
Great.
Should we take a couple more?
Do you view uncertainty, as in a changing, unpredictable environment, as a constraint or something else?
Mm. Adam has raised his hand as well. Um,
That's Adam's question.
that's Adam's question. Okay, great. Could you read that again for me?
Do you view uncertainty as a constraint or something else?
Do you view uncertainty as a constraint? I think uncertainty is definitely a constraint that everybody is under. And so when everybody is under a constraint, it becomes, in some ways, a little less useful. I think when constraints are universal, everybody is trying to solve that problem. I also think it is a constraint that is certainly made, like for some people who manage to weave through chaos and to create something new. Uncertainty is definitely a beautiful thing. We're doing this on Zoom, aren't we? And it was through the uncertainty of COVID that Zoom managed to become so popular. So I don't think it's that uncertainty cannot be a constraint that's made beautiful. I think it's probably more just that uh, creating total certainty in your market is like a mirage. You'll never reach complete certainty. So as long as you can find a small area where there's some uncertainty that's affecting your competitors or your category, and you have some insight that you think might make a small area more certain, then great. Otherwise, I think we just have to make peace with the fact that we're living with lots of uncertainty around us everywhere.
Great.
My goodness, I just stopped sharing my screen and I can see 69 questions in the chat. This is insane. Jamie, what other questions are jumping out to you?
What's more valuable in the age of AI, the constraint or the implementation?
Okay, and Roger has raised his hand. Was that Roger's question?
No.
What's more valuable in the age of AI, the constraint or the implementation? Oh, interesting. Um, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, to be honest, but I think what I can say is that I think that something that's going to become really powerful with AI as it relates to constraints is that there is an illusion that AI releases us from constraints. People, if you read the narrative around AI, it seems to be saying, we used to be constrained as a human race, and now we're not anymore. There's no more constraints. Anyone can do anything. And I think that's clearly not true. It's demonstrably not true. And I think that the best way that you can get good things out of generative AI, which is probably what we mean when we say AI, is to give it more constraints. And I think that the best outcomes from AI are when people give AI a very tight brief. As a strategist and planner in the sort of advertising world, my whole 11-year career has been about creating briefs and restrictions and sort of boxes for creatives to play in. And I've found that training has made me quite good at briefing generative AI models. All of my colleagues are the same. Asking a really, really pointy question and an interesting question to AI is going to become a skill that people will pay a lot of money for. So I think that understanding constraints as good things and understanding how to frame them will probably help the implementation of AI be even better, if that answers the question.
Cool. Um, And maybe, well, running out of time, can you just tell us a bit more about the Eat Big Fish client slash project process? Is it a one-off workshop type deal?
Absolutely.
To flesh things out to work with?
Yeah, absolutely. The workshops, plural, that we tend to work through are the tent poles in the activity, but they're definitely not where most time is spent. We tend to work in three rough stages. We tend to work in a phase of sort of immersion and in-looking, where we understand the category and the brief and all of that good stuff. We read lots of materials, we do lots of stakeholder interviews. We'll then usually have a workshop, one workshop, where we do what we call outlooking, where we're sort of exploring external influences and how we might be able to seek inspiration outside the category. There's then a gap of time where we will take everything that you have done in those workshops and sort of condense them to try and refine something down, and give you some stimulus in another workshop, which is all about building a brand strategy of some kind, or a way of thinking about your internal culture in some way, or an ideation workshop. There's lots of different ways that we do it. And then ideally, there would also be a third stage where we talk about incubation, where each team is sort of broken down into very practical teams to execute, and will help you through those steps turn a strategy that we've worked on into something that you can action. So that's usually the process that every project falls into loosely, but of course, no two projects are the same.
Amazing.
I've got the chat open now. I'm seeing Hugh Bateman, you can stay. Anyone who says thanks, Jono, invigorating, can come again. Thank you very much.
You got quite a few. Sorry, it's hard to pick one to end on. In the book, Adam said that one day someone might find a better definition of constraints as elements that foster creativity and innovation. Did he find the answer he's been looking for?
Oh, good question. You'd have to ask him. I don't think so. I'd like to think that if he had, he'd have told us, but you never know. With Adam, he may be keeping it close to his chest. One thing that I didn't mention about the definition of constraints, which is useful, is that constraints tend to fall into sort of a few different buckets. You tend to have constraints that are sort of, I can't find it right now, but you tend to have constraints that are either constraints of, here it is, I've got it here. Yes, constraints of foundation, where you're limited in something that's usually seen as a foundational element for success. Constraints of resource, usually money of some kind. Constraints of time, we all know about those. And then constraints of method, where you're limited by having to do something in a certain way. And I think all four of those components are very much still applicable today. But I will have to check and see whether Adam's found the answer he's looking for. I think that's just about taking us to time. I'm delighted that I haven't had to take a shot of hot sauce or eat this rather questionable looking banana. Hopefully I succeeded in surprising you 3 times. I do not think that I have succeeded in having more energy than we would have done in an in-person workshop. So Mark, forgive me. I think I failed on that one. But to everyone else who has joined, thank you so much. And we can send the recording out to those of you who joined or were not able to make it. Please do get in touch if you have any questions. My email address is jono@eatbigfish.com. I'm just putting it in the chat. Please do drop me a line if you would like to ask any questions, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks very much.